So probably a lot of you are wondering who I am. You know my name, you know my job title. I suppose I'm interested in looking at what qualifies me to stand here and talk to you. And as part of my job, as part of working for Pieta House, I have, I have the responsibility and the privilege of providing a voice to the 22,000 people who have come through the doors of Pieta House since 2006. And I also have the privilege and the responsibility and the compulsion to speak on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of supporters that Pieta House have across the country and across the globe. Those people walked, as Paddy said, from darkness into light on Saturday, and they were united in the fight against suicide, in the fight against self-harm, and in the fight against stigma. And I suppose what's important to those supporters are they come from many walks of life, and they come from many different perspectives. They are people who are bereaved by suicide. They are people who have survived suicide. They are people who are still in the midst of that struggle. They are friends, they are families. I'm just going to show you this image that was posted by somebody on Twitter this weekend. And I know we referred to this photograph of the doll. One of the things that's interesting in Pieta House is we have a research department, and it's excellent, and it is world class, and we operate at international conferences and all of those things. And that's an incredible resource for us to have. And we have academic research across the world, and we could quote facts and figures and bar charts and pie charts and all sorts of stuff. But I think what we have that's more powerful is we have the voices, and we have the stories, and we have the pain, and we have the agony of 22,000 people who've come through our door. And I think there's a compulsion on me and a compulsion for anyone who's involved in Pieta House to share elements of those stories that can be very hard, very bitter, and very brutal truths to hear. But without those truths, none of this really makes sense. So I'm not a statistics man. I'm not necessarily very good with sums. Thank God we have a finance department to look after that. But I'm going to give you some sums. 13,500 people elected our Taoiseach Enda Kenny to the Dáil. 11,500 people elected our new Health Minister, Simon Harris, to the Dáil. And 9,000 people elected our previous Health Minister, Leo Varadkar, to the Dáil. On Saturday morning, 130,000 people marched together from darkness into light across the globe, spanning from Sydney through to San Francisco and everywhere in between, united in that fight against suicide and self-harm. As I say, I'm not very good at statistics, but I would think a mandate of 130,000 people speaking against suicide versus a personal mandate of 13,500 for a Taoiseach says quite a lot about how important the issue is and where it needs to be. And ultimately, I think our mandate, our collective mandate, kind of trumps that of any person sitting in Leinster House. We in Pieta House and in this room need to make the voices of our 130,000 supporters heard. We need to make the voices of the 22,000 people who have come to us sharing their pain and asking for support. We need to make those heard. Those guys in Leinster House, they need to hear us. They need to listen long enough to hear what we're saying. And collectively, we need to enact a real change in the country and a real change in our society. And that's a big, big challenge. At Pieta House, this is our vision. And I'm sure you guys all understand the piece there about suicide and the piece about self-harm. The two that I want to kind of focus on are stigma and acceptance. You see, I think that as a society in Ireland, and some of the other speakers have touched on this, we care far too much about the wrong stuff, about the stuff that isn't important. We care about somebody's size or their height or what they do for a living. or who they love or who they identify as. And we don't care nearly enough about the stuff that is important, about their wellness, about their health, about how they are, about how they feel, about our own intolerance, about acceptance, about nurturing people, supporting people, or holding people in their need. The title of my talk is Get a Grip. That probably hasn't been obvious to you yet, but let me explain. This is Spike Milligan. Spike Milligan is a hero of mine. He was a comedic genius, he was a poetic genius, he was a philosophical genius. Spike lived his life as severely bipolar, and is a man who understood at its deepest level what mental illness was, what mental wellness was, and what life is with all those complexions and those complexities with it. Spike once wrote a poem about the fragility of the mind and the human context. And in the poem he talks about an egg. Now, you and I know that an egg is two things at the same time. It is this protective shell, and it is an incredibly fragile thing, both at the same time. And in Spike's poem, he talks about the grip that's required to hold an egg. And he talks about giving his egg to somebody else and asking them to hold it for him. You know that if you hold an egg too tight, you crush it and you break it. You know that if you don't hold it tight enough, you drop it and it breaks. But if you hold the grip right, you provide safety and you provide protection to that egg. Now, I'm not a biologist, but you know that if you can hold that tight, if you take it to yourself, if you warm it, if you incubate it, if you provide safety and if you have patience, it'll hatch. And from it grows something, or emerges something very beautiful but very fragile. And so that fledgling, that hatchling, requires even more nourishment, even more support, even more care. And in order to, when that's provided, it can grow strong, it can grow independent, it can grow self-sufficient, and it becomes one of this unity of everyone else. Stigma is the grip that crushes. As a society, we need to stop crushing people. We need to stop crushing their dreams, and we need to stop crushing their lives. Acceptance is the right grip. Acceptance when we hold people close, when we protect them, when we incubate them, when we let them develop and grow and become beautiful and strong and a full part of society. So how do we prevent suicide? Care less about what's not important and what doesn't concern us, and care more about what's important and what causes concern to other people and to ourselves. We're all fragile. We all need to be held. We all need security, we all need stability, we all need time to develop, and we all need time to grow. We all need to be nourished, and we need to be accepted. We all have collective responsibility to prevent suicide, to prevent self-harm, and to abolish stigma. And I genuinely believe that together we can create a collective voice to speak of our own vulnerabilities, to speak of the vulnerabilities of those around us, and to speak up for those who can't speak. The challenge is to make our voices heard, and I'll leave that with you.